Welcome back for the final session of the day on the fascinating title of How Will Audiences Be Viewing TV in 10 Years' Time? Now, a couple of announcements. It will, I think, probably be fairly clear to the eagle-eyed among you that I'm not Professor Cathy Johnson. Unfortunately, Cathy is unwell.
Unless the operation was a success.
Yes, beyond my private dreams, I was going to say. No, so I'm actually going to be chairing this session as well. Turning to the panel, there's also a change of panelist, in that this morning Helen Burrows from the BBC, unfortunately, is also ill and cried off. So we're very pleased at short notice, actually about 1 hour's notice, Professor Maria Michalis, who's Professor of Communications Policy at the University of Westminster, has stood in her place. Very grateful. Maria is a long-term VLV member and trustee as well. So just to go to the other members of the panel, we have Ed Leighton of the Ofcom, and Ed is the Director of Strategy and Policy at Ofcom. He leads the strategic work looking at emerging questions across the sector. And Ed is going to get the session going, presenting some slides based on the work that Ofcom has done ahead of the DCMS report on this subject. The other members of the panel are Magnus Brooke. Magnus is Director of Strategy, Policy and Regulation at ITV plc, one of the acknowledged experts in this area. We have Laurie Patten. Laurie Patten is the Director of what's it called, the exact title? Communication and Policy?
Strategy and Regulation.
Strategy and Regulation, Laurie, at Arqiva. Arqiva, as you will know, is the provider of the digital terrestrial network in the UK, and therefore very important to all of us. So over to Ed to get us going.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for having me along. Ofcom produced a report earlier in the year, and to get the session going, I thought I'd just share some of what we heard and some of what we found in producing this report. Now, if you're like me, and most of the people I know, we spend a lot of time watching TV, but not a lot of time thinking about how it reaches us. And that hasn't been the case for me for the last year or two. And my team have been asked by government, by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, to prepare a report to advise them on how the various different ways that TV reaches our screens is evolving over time. We were asked to do this earlier in the year, and we produced the report in May, which you can find on our website. I'm sure we can send it around afterwards. But the focus in that report is not on technologies, it's on audiences. And that's why the title of this session in your conference is so welcome. I think what I'll spend a few minutes doing is to just share some of our findings and the audience trends. And these are also the trends that are shaping our next piece of work, which is the Public Service Media Review, which will be publishing a review of the last 3 years shortly, and a look forward early next year to wider questions of public service broadcasting. So what do we know about how people are watching TV and how it reaches them? Well, the first thing we know is that people are watching TV now from a range of different sources. So the individual numbers and labelling on the chart is not particularly important. The big blue third from 12 o'clock to about 4 o'clock there is broadcast live TV, scheduled TV that we see through a linear programme guide. The next couple of segments, the green and the pink, are viewing that is still from the broadcasters we know and love, but is delayed for either by a recorder box or through their iPlayer or ITVX and so on. The next segment has grown a significant amount in the last few years and is the Netflixes of the world and Disney Plus and Amazon Prime. And the segment after that is YouTube and the kind of video sharing platforms and IP providers. The very top box is other things that you use your television for, particularly gaming. So a lot of audiences are getting a whole different suite of content from different places. So I'm going to share just a couple of charts about how that's changed over time with about a 5-year horizon. So the first is to say that broadcaster viewing, so viewing of content from the traditional broadcasters, live and delayed, is falling really quite starkly in the last 5 years. So we've seen, you can see on the chart that it's reduced by nearly 50 minutes. And this is significant, and it's a steady trend over time. The next chart shows that actually while there is a great degree of variance in the age demographics and the habits that each of them have. So in a very kind of predictable, logical way for a long time, the oldest audiences, which are the very top line, watch more than the next group of audiences down, and so on all the way down to the youngest audiences at the bottom. And we know that older audiences continue to watch a great deal more live TV viewing. However, they're also falling. There is a very steady fall in the amount of TV, and particularly live TV, that all demographics are viewing. And this is, we're in a geological society. In younger age demographics, this is a geological movement. These are tectonic movements that were not even changed particularly by the pandemic. You can see in older demographics, there was an uptick in 2020 where we weren't allowed to go outside for a time. But for every age group under 45, there was still a fall in 2020, despite the lockdowns. This is a resilient trend that is continuing over time. And even for live viewing that remains, what we found is that an increasing amount of live viewing is being done on demand, over the internet. And the reason is people quite like the functionality of being able to watch over the internet. This chart shows the amount of viewing that is from the minute after a live broadcast for the rest of the day after the broadcast is made. And it shows that 45% of all of the viewing that's done after the moment of broadcast is done in the first 15 minutes. Why is that? It's because the phone went. It's because the chicken was in the oven and had taken slightly too long. Audiences enjoy the functionality to be able to pause and come back to their content. This is an intuitive functionality that we see consistently across all kinds of people. It's over 2/3 are done in the first hour of all of the time shifting. That functionality, if you want high definitions as well, that is all delivered by by internet options, and that's why people are spending more of their lifetime on the internet. However, there are a large number of people, millions of people, who continue to rely solely on what is called digital terrestrial television, DTT. This is Freeview to all of us. Freeview has 3.3 million households today that only use Freeview and nothing else. This 3.3 million are 4 times more likely than the general population to be over 75. They are 3 times more likely to be in the lowest income demographic, and they are twice as likely to have a disability or a limiting condition. We can see the share by age on the right-hand side as well. These are a very significant percentage, over 75, but not all by any stretch. There are millions of homes who continue to rely on DTT. But what we know is that there are also now millions of homes who are solely reliant on the internet. And many of them need a compelling live TV proposition, so they continue to watch the moments that bring the nation together that you've been talking about for your conference. We can see that in the far left-hand column of the right-hand chart, we're pretty confident now that there are more people who are solely reliant on the internet. They don't use an aerial or a dish or a cable. They just use the internet. And there are more of those than those who are unconnected, that haven't plugged in their TV set to any sort of internet connection. The biggest segment is the lowest one. That's the 18 million, 17.9, who do a bit of both. They get the best of both worlds, and audiences are very well served today. The vast majority do a bit of both. So far, what I've talked about are things that we've observed. They are facts. They're research that we've done based on what's happened to date. You can now start to get into the question which is 10 years forward, and that's where things get a bit less certain. Clearly, projections can vary. So what is it we're confident of? We're pretty confident that there will be fewer and fewer homes that don't plug in their TV to the internet over time. That will continue to fall. And we're pretty confident that the number of homes who solely rely on an internet connection will rise very significantly. So the solutions that the industry are developing for those, that the public service broadcasters, for example, through Freely are developing, will become more and more important to people who continue to value TV. It is not one trend that changes the demand for a platform like Freeview. What our report found is that it's the combination of people watching slightly less TV, slightly less live TV, and of the live TV they want, they will also watch more of that live TV over the internet that cumulatively will reduce the amount of time that people spend on the Freeview platform. That Freeview platform, this forecast puts in about 10 years' time to be about 40% of the level of use that we see today. And that can vary. It might be 50% or 60% or 30%. The overarching point is that it will be significantly less than now if current trends continue. And our report found that this will put pressure on the strength of that platform. A platform that's served millions of audiences who use it alongside IP and the 3.3 million who today still rely on it entirely may well see, from the responses we had to our consultation, changes over time. There's a question about whether HD services will continue to be justified in the future. There are questions as to whether the same number or quality of channels can be persevered. And there's a question that if the total distribution cost of reaching audiences in all of the different ways they want can't be sustained, then who will continue to pay for that if it is the government's wish to have all of those options available for audiences in the future? Left to itself, our central finding was that if it is left to an unmanaged transition, that the cumulative dozens of players make individual decisions over the future of this infrastructure, that you could end up in a chaotic or unmanaged transition where things would get a little bit worse over time. And that's a problem because it would take 8 to 10 years to move to anything different. We think certainty for investors, for the industry to move forward is important, and that's why we set out 3 different approaches that the industry and the government could look to consider. These aren't detailed options, they are approaches to kind of pick the landing zone for where the government wants to end up. The first option is would be to say we want to continue to rely on Freeview to be the main means of delivering TV free at the point of service for the long term. Now, you would try and put a position where it was run on a technically and economically more efficient basis, investing to move to more efficient standards that would allow you to free up some of the airwaves that it uses, the radio spectrum, to sell and hopefully fund alternative services. That would need either industry to agree with that model or for a degree of government subsidy. At the other end, on the far right, you could move to switch off Freeview. And we'll talk about why that would be so difficult, and to rely as a primary delivery mechanism for the internet. Bear in mind in particular the 3.3 million homes who solely rely on DTT today and don't have the internet, but also the very large number of homes who do a bit of both. We can't assume that they would be happy doing all of their linear viewing without some further support. The middle option would be to reduce DTT to a slimmer set of services while you manage the migration. And we call that a nightlight, that there would continue to be some level of provision with the core services as you manage people to move across. That could be an indefinite proposition or as a fixed term part of moving across. Now, we don't have a view as to which of those are taken forwards. That's a matter for government. But what we were keen to emphasise is that each of those options would take 8 to 10 years to move towards for various technical reasons. And a clear vision would be very helpful for the industry to invest with certainty to move us to whichever approach the government decide. I'll leave you with one final observation. So the central question as to whether you think the far-right approach there is credible and able to deliver the same level of universal coverage as today is the take-up of broadband. Availability is a challenge, but it's a challenge that can be solved and is being solved by the rollout of better and better infrastructure over this kind of time period, the kind of 10 years forward. Take-up is a much bigger challenge. And there are some people who simply don't want the internet. There are others who simply can't afford it. About 4.2% of the population, about 2.5 million people today, don't use the internet at all. And about 2 million more do so solely over a mobile device that may be unsuited to providing your TV service. That's a very significant number of people. The wider consideration the government will be thinking about is are there cumulatively a whole range of regions, not just TV, but healthcare and public services, that justify moving society more online than they are today? TV isn't the biggest win there, but it may be part of the equation for them. The other sectors that depend on the mast infrastructure are very significant as well, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about the other users of the broadcast mast that Freeview uses today, the radio sector being the biggest, and DCMS have provided some certainty to FM radio out to 2030, but not beyond. That will be part of this conversation. So it's a complicated policy dilemma that the government are wrestling with, and hopefully that's been a useful start to kind of understanding the cumulative pressures of every decision that audiences are taking every time they pause a program and move online, or every time they watch something on Netflix, how that's adding up to a big question and perhaps the biggest strategic challenge in Freeview's history. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Ed. I think that sets out the challenge and the dilemma very, very clearly indeed. I'm now going to ask each panel member to say a few words, 2 or 3 minutes from their perspective of these big issues, which are really important to all of us here as an audience. It's about how we'll have access to television in the future. The current spectrum, which provides DTT, is available, guaranteed for the next 10 years or so, but everything is to play for beyond that. And the big question is what can be maintained, how it should be maintained, and what's it mean for us in our homes. So I'm going to start with the company which is potentially long-term challenged by this, which is Arqiva, which provides the digital terrestrial network. I'm going to ask Laurie to speak first. Laurie.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the chance to speak today. First off, look, we welcome the government review and all the work that Ofcom have done to date. We do think this is an important issue. It clearly is important to us as the provider and the one that operates and owns the networks at the moment. But more importantly, I think it's pretty crucial for viewers and for society at large. The review is an opportunity for government to, I think, clarify its long-term position. I think all in the industry would welcome that. And we do have concerns that a wrong decision could be taken, and that those broadcast services could be turned off and taken away from viewers. And I thought I'd just set out a few of our sort of concerns, and Ed's touched on a few of the issues there. First off is terrestrial TV. It does play a really important role at the moment, and that is set to continue well into the future within effectively a hybrid viewing environment where people can have broadcast services and they can have streaming services like Netflix, BBC iPlayer, etc. alongside them. That's the model we have at the moment. Now, there's lots of stats around this area, but if we take some by Enders Analysis, who report in this area, their numbers suggest that around 36% of viewing at the moment is through those terrestrial television, and that amounts to around 21 billion hours of TV viewing per year. And they forecast that even by 2039, there will still be 16 billion hours worth of viewing over those terrestrial networks. So a very sizable number, and over 11 million households still relying on that terrestrial TV in some shape or form. And Ed touched on that it's going to be particularly important for some key groups. It is the elderly, it is those on lower incomes, it is those often with disabilities, and it's those often living in rural areas. They rely really heavily on those services. And if we take the over 65s, Ed had some stats there, on average, they watch around 4.5 hours of linear TV a day. So this is a huge part of people's lives. And whilst trends are changing, viewing habits are changing, for those key groups, that their viewing isn't changing anywhere as quickly as young people or perhaps those richer in society, and they potentially can't afford or don't want those other alternatives. It's true to say that terrestrial TV, that network of towers and services, does still underpin the universal delivery of TV in this country. It is the way that we ensure that pretty much everyone can receive free-to-air services no matter what your income is or where you live in this country. So it's incredibly important. And the alternative, which would mean switching off those services and effectively requiring everyone to have a high-speed fixed broadband connection, that is not free. And estimates do vary. But a recent report by Ernst & Young suggested that there could be around 4 million households who would be forced to take high-speed broadband and pay for that who otherwise wouldn't, and it could cost around £900 million a year. And we think that the reality is that just millions would just not be afford to do that, or they would not want to have to pay for that. We also believe that there's no real evidence that people want to see these services turned off. Certainly all of the survey work that I've seen, when you actually ask people what they want, they record quite high levels of support for those services continuing, and we'd like to see that really taken into account in the ongoing review. So in many respects, this debate is being pushed onto viewers rather than them calling for it and saying that they want that change. Ed touched on some of the wider concerns. We also have concerns about what it could mean more broadly for other sectors and critical national infrastructure in this country. The broadcast TV network, it does operate as a shared network with radio. So many of the sites share TV and radio, the field force, the operations, the maintenance, a lot of that are all shared costs. So clearly if you took TV away, there would be some impact on radio. Also, those masts and towers, they're used for emergency services, they're used for wider communications networks, they're used for the utilities sector. For us, we think it makes sense for a developed, mature economy to have a resilient and diverse communications infrastructure. We just think it makes sense to want to have more than one network to give you that diversity and resilience. I think it's relevant to say that other countries are more supportive and are thinking long-term about this. So, for instance, in Spain, the broadcasters there are actively planning and launching ultra-high-definition services on broadcast and really planning for the use of these networks in the long term. In France, we saw new HD services being launched on broadcast as part of the Olympics. And Italy has also come out and set out its long-term support for these services. So there is a model that other countries are looking at which the UK can follow. And we believe there is a long-term role for those terrestrial TV services. And we're just hoping that the review is open to exploring those options about how the networks might evolve, how we can potentially address issues around financial sustainability and what viewers might need and what broadcasters might need. And we just hope the review can explore all of that with an open mind.
Thanks so much, Laurie. Now it's over to you, Magnus, next, I think. And perhaps you could say, just for I have perceived that the main broadcasters, ITV, BBC, have become more enthusiastic, more keen to move quickly rather than slowly in this area in terms of moving towards IPTV. First of all, could you confirm that I'm right in that perception? And secondly, tell me why, basically. Sorry, it's Internet Protocol Television. It's basically getting TV over your internet. Okay? Over to you.
Very good, thank you, Colin. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you today. I'm going to start actually with a little bit of a description of my family because I think it helps bring this issue alive a bit. So I have an 18-year-old daughter, and if you said to her, "What time's it on?" She would look at you completely blankly. She would have no idea what it meant at all. What time's it on? It's on all the time. If you talk to me and my wife, we consume some of our services on DTT, but some of them on the internet. We are the ultimate hybrid house. We're right in the middle. If you talk to my 85-year-old mother, she's an avid reader of the Radio Times, and for her, the idea of when it's on is absolutely critical. The whole of the world revolves around when it's on. That's the spectrum of television consumption that we've got in the UK today, which I think Ed described with some numbers. And what that gets to is this whole idea of universality, which is a really important principle of PSB, which we've really not had to think about a huge amount over the last sort of 40, 50 years or so. It's just been there, but it's getting more and more expensive to give everybody in Britain TV in the way exactly that they would like to receive it. And that's the number for the problem. And actually for broadcasters, we've spent the last 10 years getting as efficient as we can be. So you may have noticed now we don't have any SD, standard definition services on satellite anymore. So we've made some very significant savings there, and we've made savings elsewhere in DTT. But we're getting to the point now where there is no low-hanging fruit in terms of money we could save. And the hard truth is that the cost of DTT is going up quite substantially at the moment, and the cost of IP distribution, so IPTV, internet television, scales with every extra hour that's consumed. So for every person that consumes an extra hour of internet television, our costs go up. So we have at the moment a perfect storm almost of our DTT costs rising and our IP costs rising with every additional hour that's consumed. It is a perfect storm. And look, it could get worse because, as I think Ed was describing, this platform is the accumulation of lots of individual decisions by commercial channels, by commercial multiplex operators, and they are acting commercially. The PSBs are in a slightly different position. But actually, we run a commercial DTT multiplex, and we're not overrun, I'm afraid to say, by channels who want to launch on that capacity. There's lots of capacity, and the prices have been coming down quite substantially. And it's not surprising, because viewing on DTT, it's a market. And if viewing is going down, there will be less willingness of channels to come onto the platform and to pay, and frankly, to share the cost of running the platform. So we find it very hard to see, on one of Ofcom's options, the arguments to invest any more money in DTT. We just don't think there's any commercial case to do that. And we don't think that people will come flocking back to DTT away from a world of on-demand television just because there's a bit more HD on DTT. And indeed, the sunlit uplands, which I think is one of the options of more HD on DTT, we think is a delusion. And frankly, the real challenge we're going to have over the next few years is deciding whether there's any HD on DTT. Those contracts expire, the licenses and so on, in 2030. There are some decisions for people to take about whether they can duplicate SD and HD on DTT. That's a very different question. So, look, for PSBs like ITV, universality is getting more and more expensive. And in truth, that just impacts on the amount we can spend on programmes. The more we spend on distribution, the less we can afford to spend on the actual content we're distributing. That's the tension that we have to face. And the truth is, we're going to have to make choices, both as ITV, but probably also as a country. What do we want? And it's fine to say, survey evidence says everybody would like everything to stay as it is, but it's a bit like those surveys that said, would you like to pay the same amount of tax or less and get better public services? And everybody says yes. I get that. It's a natural human instinct, so I'd rather not have to make choices and trade-offs. But I think we do need to face the economic costs of universality, because if we want something for everyone, we need to work out who's going to pay for that and how they're going to pay for it. And we need to make some choices as a society and not understate the choices that we face. And look, I really appreciate, and we really appreciate, the scale of the social and economic consequences and the challenges here, but I do think we need to face into them. And there are some big policy debates coming here, the future of the BBC Charter, the licence fee, and obviously the future of TV distribution. And I think one of the things that government and Ofcom are going to need to do now is look at the 10-year perspective of PSB. So I think we need to have an overall PSB strategy, not just a strategy for the BBC here, for distribution here, not looking at all of this in the round and saying, what overall do we want? What's the right balance of services? And that would be my plea. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Magnus. And finally, over to Maria, who, is, as I said, has come in at really short notice to chat. Maria, I know, apart from being a VLV member and looking at what audiences want and need, You've also, I think, done a bit of work in Europe and what's happening in Europe in this area. So we're really interested to hear more about that. But over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so yes, I have done work on television distribution in Britain and Europe. I think I would like to say a few words about key issues that should concern citizens and audiences. Some of the issues I will mention, previous speakers have mentioned, but perhaps I'll approach them differently, slightly differently. I will focus on 4 issues. The first one is universality. At the moment, we still have a large number of households that are not on broadband, they don't have internet access for whatever reasons. We may think that this is a small number of households, and perhaps that's easily resolved. I'm not sure that's the case, because that has been quite a stubborn number of households that for decades have not been able to get online for whatever reasons, partly because of availability. It's difficult to serve some of these communities because they are rural communities, they are hard to reach communities. Sometimes the technical solutions available will not provide the fast internet connections that television access will require, and so on. So universality is definitely an issue, and we have to keep that in mind, whatever the future of television distribution is going to be. Affordability is another big issue, and that's the second point. We saw that there are audiences, older audiences in particularly, those on lower incomes, those with disabilities, that rely exclusively on Freeview. We also have to think what internet television means. Given what we know today, if we want to access television via an internet connection, automatically that means an extra cost to each household, and that's the broadband connection cost. If you receive your television through Freeview, you don't incur that extra cost. So internet television automatically means an extra cost, and that's the broadband connection. The third issue, and I think that's very important and perhaps not much discussed, concerns resilience and cybersecurity. If all television is delivered through the internet, if there is a hostile agent and they want to disrupt internet communication, and that's not a hypothetical scenario, as you know, what happens then? A critical infrastructure is down. We have no access to television at all. So the DTT platform is highly resilient and provides cybersecurity. A fourth point has to do with the environmental impact of the 2 platforms. The Freeview platform, the digital terrestrial platform, is environmentally friendly, more friendly compared to internet television, because it's how the internet operates. So it damages the environment much more. So from an environmental perspective, digital terrestrial is a better solution. So maybe, and in general, this is a big decision, as all the speakers have said. I think that if we are to transition towards internet television, it will be a much bigger transition than what we had previously from analog to digital television. And it's most definitely a decision that has to involve and the discussion has just started, the society, citizens, and audiences to make it work. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Maria. Really important points from the point of view of the audience. Coming to you, Magnus, how would you deal with some of those issues like cybersecurity and so on, but also the sheer difficulty for many households in making the investment and the connection that's going to be necessary? Because believe me, as Maria said, the disruption from this changeover will be nothing like the disruption we had when we had to move to DTT. It is very, very significant potentially. It matters to ITV as a business. Are you prepared to invest some money to help consumers with this process? Or do you expect all that to come from government, the people themselves, whatever?
So let me deal with those in turn. So they're very different points. So if I deal with the cyber point, so look, there has been for some time a good argument that the sustaining the DTT infrastructure was a good thing in parallel to having the internet, because there were two competing means of distribution, two alternative routes in. I think the flaw in the argument is really in Ed's numbers, where if you look at where we think we're going to be in 2030, 35, 40, actually people will have chosen IP. And they won't have DTT. So it may well be a very resilient way of getting messages, but you're getting it to a tiny fraction of the population. And unless everybody's going to get up on their roof and re-erect an aerial in the event of a sort of Rod Hull style, getting up and trying to get the signal again, having not had an aerial for X years, I don't think it's a particularly great argument, to be honest, to sustain DTT. I think it was a good argument, but I don't think it's going to be a particularly good argument in the future as people transition to IP. I think on the kind of transition, look, we absolutely don't underestimate the scale of difficulty for people who haven't got the internet. And if they didn't get the internet during COVID and the lockdowns, that they are pretty heavy resistors of the internet. I do get that. I think that it will take a big national effort. I don't think anyone denies that, to make this transition if we choose as a country to go down that road. But I think the thing I'd say is let's not see this just through the prism of television. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think actually if you look at the debates that are popping up all over in British life, whether that's the future of ticket offices versus buying tickets for trains online, whether it's booking a GP appointment now, where effectively you more or less have to be on the internet to book it. I mean, there are lots and lots of ways in which this is coming, and I think what we need to do is join up some of those different policies across government rather than seeing this as just being about television. And I think once you start to do that, you can start to have this sensible conversation with government which says, actually, this is a big national project. This is a big mission, a sixth mission possibly, where actually you can make a big difference to national productivity. You can make a difference to the economy of providing public services. So it's not just about television. I think if you start to think about it in that way, suddenly I think the transitional costs, the fact that some people won't have enough money to pay for broadband. I mean, there are 1 million households probably in Britain who literally at the end of the month don't have the money. And that is a big policy problem, but actually they're probably people who could benefit quite a lot from having a fixed internet connection at home. And we've got to be able to figure out some policy solutions to ensure that we can get that cohort of people into the mainstream of national life and online. And I don't think anybody underestimates, at least of all the people at ETV who helped in the transition from analogue to digital television. It is going to be different. It is going to be harder, but it's a big national project, and I think we should look at it very seriously.
And my question about who pays? Will ITV chip
Well,
in?
no, who pays? I mean, I think, look, I think it, as I say, I think because it's a big national project, and because the benefits of this aren't really about television. I mean, the truth is our IP costs will go up a lot if you switch off DTT. So we'll probably end up in the same position as we've been in historically in relation to our distribution costs in an all IP world, because every single hour of television will drive additional cost. So I don't think we're not sitting here saying we've got to we should pay or we've got to switch over. I think what we're saying is, look, these costs are going to become unmanageable. And they're going to impact on what we can afford to pay for our content, and ultimately whether whether we can meet our PSB obligations. So we have to address this problem. I don't think we're absolutely saying it has to be a switch off, but we're saying, look, that is one way you could do it. If you go down a nightlight route, maybe there has to be some subsidy for a nightlight, because effectively it's a safety net for people who really are very resistant to switching over.
Laurie?
Yeah, no, look, just to come back on that, because I think this is where maybe forecast and interpretation of the stats is important. I don't agree that you are going to be in this world where everyone has all jumped to all IP and they're not in that hybrid world. And I think even Ofcom stats show that, and that's what those Enders numbers show, which are still saying 16 billion hours worth is through DTT in 2039, and that's still in a hybrid household. And that's going to be the reality for most of these people. There's going to be a growing IP-only trend, but there's still going to be that big cohort of hybrid households who are internet connected, but they are still choosing to watch through DTT. And what that does mean in resilience terms is if the internet does go down, as it can do, they will be able to switch and watch DTT. That will be the reality still for millions and millions of households, on top of those households who genuinely haven't got any internet. So, and we did find, particularly during COVID, just how important it was for getting that government messaging out there. We have seen actually with Russia and Ukraine and cyber attacks, how even within streaming services that we deliver, they are more vulnerable than that broadcast network because it is protected and insulated. And so there is that argument there, I think, from a society perspective about having both, having resilience, having diversity, as well as that broader role for that infrastructure to also help in other sectors and other services, whether that's radio or wider communication. So I think that is an important consideration here. It was good to hear Magnus touch on that cost point around the fact that there may not even be real cost savings here for broadcasters when you make that shift to online, because that is also our interpretation, is that aside from what the consumer has to invest in fixed broadband, there are costs to stream that content, to pump it out over the internet. And if you do some rough back-of-the-envelope numbers, it could well be that in the period you would do a switch off, there's no obvious saving compared to what you would spend if you carried on with terrestrial TV. And it's even the case now. If you switch it off tomorrow and all of that viewing went online, just the sheer cost of doing that via streaming would be massive, and maybe not a million miles off even what it costs for terrestrial TV.
Thank you. Ed, can I sort of put you in a position as if you worked for BBC Verify? In terms of in terms of what you've heard over the last 20 minutes, and anything that you want to pick up on in particular?
Well, I know how hard that job is. I spent yesterday at Ofcom's media literacy conference on the theme of mis and disinformation. So, so I've heard how hard that job is. Look, our best guess is in the report, and I think, as I said, there are things we don't know and things that we can say with some confidence. I think on a few of these points, what we're hearing is more agreement than perhaps it sounds, that resilient infrastructure is really important to audiences to be able to receive, and for the government to be able to talk to the nation in a moment of crisis. I think we're hearing that affordability, to make sure this remains a universal proposition, it is also really important. I've heard, I've talked to an awful lot of people about the future of TV distribution in the last 18 months. I've talked to very, very few people who want to reduce the ambition for the reach that Freeview has today, to reduce it below the statutory set level of 98.5%, which it exceeds. The question is how you do that, and how you do so in a way that is sustainable and reaches a compact between the various industry parties who need to be part of delivering that and the government, and that's what the government are wrestling with. I think there is a risk. The only risk two risks I caution against. The first is to kind of to make assumptions at an early stage of policy development. So if we assume that the policy will be that anyone who doesn't have broadband today will have to pay, even if they can't afford it or lose their TV, that is a policy design choice that the government would be making in this. So you could choose to provide some level of subsidy for certain people who couldn't afford that. That's a choice, so we shouldn't assume that it is necessarily the case, or other industry parties could contribute to it. We know, for example, that in some of the investment options for investing in one option or another, that one of the benefits of moving or reducing the amount of radio spectrum that DTT has is that you could sell some of that for alternative use. That would create a fund that could be used to go to the Treasury, or it could be used to be part of this solution, and that will be in the government's thinking too. I think the third caution I'd offer is, we had the quote up on the slide. I think an awful lot of this will happen regardless of what the government choose to do or what individual broadcasters choose to do. And to hope that it isn't happening or that it might slow down a bit and to wait and put off this decision risks underserving precisely the consumers who rely and the audiences who rely on DTT today. So I think what I've heard from many of the industry stakeholders I've spoken to is the need for certainty and for certainty soon, so that whatever the approach is taken, that we can move forward to it with some confidence and make the necessary investments.
I should just add that the DCMS has set up a forum looking at this issue with 3 working groups, one of which is on the audience, what it means for audiences, and the VLV is on that group and on the main forum as well. And that is designed to report in approximately 12 months' time. It's just started. So I think I'd like to open it to the audience now with questions. I see lots of hands coming up. That's great. I'll start straight in front of me, because it's the first one I saw.
Adrian Pickering, member of the VLV and electronics engineer. 2 things haven't come up in the conversation so far, and that is Ed's talk didn't say anything about satellite reception. I think there is about 6.5 million Sky users. I think probably most of them use or even have to use a satellite dish. So were we using DTT as a euphemism, or is it strictly terrestrial? And another thing that Ofcom's involved with currently, and that is the Digital Voice initiative that's been stalling a bit. But it will mean that anybody who wants continued telephone service is going to have an internet connection. So where's the joined-up thinking going on, please?
Thank you. Ed, I'm not sure it's fair to ask you that, but do you want to have a go?
No, it's entirely fair. So absolutely, constrained for time, very happy to speak about satellite. So there are 2 main satellite providers, as most of you will know. So there's the Sky satellite proposition, which, as you say, reaches about 7 million homes today. And there is FreeSat, which is is a free service that is also run by the same company that kind of oversee Freeview. So FreeSat about 1.5 million or so, I think, homes to the 7. So the majority of that business is Sky's business. That's what justifies keeping the satellites in the sky. That most of the revenue that sustains that infrastructure is from the Sky platform. What you will see if you look at a Sky advert today, is the satellites being blown up. That's the image they have chosen to encourage you to take an IP, an internet-delivered solution through where it's delivered down an internet box. Now, you can read too much into an advert, but I think over time, the strategy for Sky is to move more and more of their distribution onto the internet networks, which puts further pressure on the internet networks and a need for them to invest. I'm sure BT would be very mindful of if they were on the panel. I think it is an open question, but in some doubt, as to whether the FreeSat platform could sustain itself were Sky to decide they will do their own migration, is the first thing I'd say. The interconnection with the Freeview question is, does that make you more reliant on Freeview? Because homes that currently have satellite actually choose to move on to Freeview, or do you have an earlier transition issue to deal with to manage the FreeSat audiences onto IP? A lot of FreeSat audiences choose FreeSat because they can't receive a DTT, a Freeview signal, and that's particularly prevalent, we know, in Wales for topographical reasons.
Thank you. Questions? In the middle, Patrick, hi.
an observation and a question. Patrick McIntosh, VLV member. The observation is that I think climate and age and cyber are all going to play a hugely bigger part in this than has been discussed. I remember when the hurricane came through and we were all searching for our transistor or our wirelesses because we couldn't get any sort of communication. But my point, I think Maria makes, is that climate could have a significant effect upon how we consume and the cost and so forth. I look after somebody who's suffering from dementia and blindness, and I've been surprised by the fact that I've actually gone back from being digital to being terrestrial, simply because the person can actually operate terrestrial. And I think an aging population, a demographic aging population, is increasingly going to find, both because of the cost, and they're going to run out of money, and because of the difficulty of operating a digital age, they're going to go back to a thing where you just simply press a button and, good Lord, there's a BBC or ITV or something like that. And so I think you haven't really understood, I think, how demographics is going to play a much bigger part. But my question is to Arqiva, and that is that you recently put up your fees hugely to the product providers. You're owned by Macquarie, and you have a fairly interesting agenda, I would suggest, for the next 10 years. And I think everybody would like to know exactly what the agenda is for Arqiva over the next 10 years in terms of laundering as much money as you can out of the system while you're still in control of it.
Well, what a question. I mean, look, we see ourselves as long-term investors in critical national infrastructure. The contracts, what happened with digital switchover when we did that transition, we negotiated and agreed contracts which run till around the early 2030s, and pretty much they're a regulated contract. We're overseen by a regulator, and various choices were made then actually to quite smooth some of those charges. There is indexation with that, which means that with inflation they go up and our cost base goes up as well. So there's not really anything to hide around that. You're right, we are part owned by Macquarie. It's fair to say our investors haven't had a dividend during the time that they've owned Arqiva. We've just announced our results. They haven't had a dividend. It's not a case where they are taking money out of Arqiva. We're a highly regulated business. We have people operating and working in Arqiva who are the ones who go out and mend stuff and keep this going. They very much have a public service ethos. We see ourselves as part of the public services here. We're the ones who keep it on air. So we're complying with that contract, which was agreed. After that contract comes up, which takes us into the period of the review, we're open. We would like to have a really good discussion with the broadcasters and others of a way of evolving the service, making it more efficient. We agree with Ofcom's option there about trying to make it more efficient, which in the period we're talking about, because of the lifespan of the equipment that was put in that digital switchover, means you can invest in more efficient equipment, which will hopefully allow you to bring the costs down. And if we can have a longer term commitment, you can put something together that I think can be quite attractive to broadcasters. The problem we've got at the moment is you're living under uncertainty. So any investment which says you're going to need a return and it's going to take longer than 10 years, if services could be turned off in 2034, it's very hard to make those investment cases. If as a country we can decide we are going to need these services and we sign up to a longer term period, then it opens up all sorts of commercial possibilities. But it's certainly not the case that our investors are taking money out of DCT. They haven't taken a dividend. And we do invest under a regulated structure. So that is the way we operate.
Sorry, you had your hand up, Magnus.
Well, yes, I mean, it's a really good question, and my perspective is different, I'm afraid. So for a couple of reasons. I think the first is that the dividend question is irrelevant. It's all debt. So it's a debt finance company. So that's what you've got to look at. Never mind dividends. So the second bit of it, and this is important, I think, is that it is a regulated monopoly. And actually, a really important question is whether regulation is working and whether actually there's a need to have a look now, again, at those costs in order to make sure that in the 10 years we've got coming up until 2034, those costs are genuinely cost related. So it's a cost plus contract, which as far as we're concerned, it's not anymore. And there's a few reasons for that. One of the reasons, not the only one, is that we've had an extraordinary moment with COVID and with the war in Ukraine, which has caused this incredible spike. And if you're on an indexed contract with tens of millions of pounds, the indexation effect of that is absolutely enormous. And that is a shock. There's no other way of putting it. The Bank of England didn't predict it. Inflation went mad. And the result is if you're on an RPI inflated contract, that's a real problem. And then that compounds for the period. So that is creating a real problem. I mean, that's something which the regulator needs to look at. And we're absolutely pressing it to do that.
Okay. Question in the middle. I'm going to run for another 5 minutes, so we're nearly at the end of time. But we're slightly late starting. In the middle there.
Can I start without the microphone?
No, it's not.
They can't hear you at home.
How kind of you to let me come. I'm Philip Bergson. I'm a member of the Critics Circle, but I've been all my life an active writer, presenter, broadcaster in television and radio, and mostly at the BBC, but not exclusively. I have admiration for the presentations, very revealing. I have a comment and a question. The comment is, Lord Reith must be spinning in his grave, and George Orwell says he was right. In the cinema, for example, we moved from 35mm hard prints for financial reasons only to the so-called digital Blu-ray DCP presentation, because it's not so heavy as to ship 35mm prints around the country. Nevertheless, in the last 2 years, there are more and more cinemas at the behest of audiences requesting it, who are screening 35mm prints, because the quality of the image is better than almost anything you get on DCP, even in an expensive cinema. However, many of the cinemas have had their projectors taken out. At the same time, Marks and Spencer's and many other places are moving back from, I don't know quite what the word is, non-human interaction to pay. On the one hand, it is a remit on Lord Reith that the television is one of the greatest instruments of education, culture, and propaganda. And yet at the bottom line, it's all about the money, isn't it? Now, you say there is a choice, but, for example, BBC 4 is going to be taken off and going on exclusively online, isn't it?
Possibly sometime over the next 2 to 3 years.
And I'm also
yes.
surprised about
BBC
the statistic.
3, of course, went online and was then brought back to broadcast.
Because of the large amount of money spent on BBC 3 for young people who were never watching it.
So your question? Sorry.
My question is now this. Is it really the case, through all these statistics, and how are these statistics acquired, that only 3 million people regularly watch television on television?
Don't think that's quite what the statistics said.
So it's the case that we know around 3 million people today are solely reliant on the Freeview infrastructure. The majority of
on the Freeview
people
in the whole of the country, population of nearly 80 million.
Are solely reliant. That's
Well,
correct.
3 million households.
You mean 3 million households or 3 million people?
Households are solely reliant.
That's correct. And 18 million households use Freeview alongside another technology.
But how have you arrived at that figure that only 3 million exclusively watch on television? That is not my anecdotal experience, and I travel a lot around the country. I just wondered how you arrive at this figure. Is it like a marketing statistic?
Well,
you haven't rung up everybody and saying, are you watching it or not? You know?
We haven't rung up everyone.
No.
But there are recognised market research methodologies which allow you to take a representative sample of the country and extrapolate.
And it's
thousands of respondents.
to be fair, it's a fairly consistent figure at various studies that I've seen of this. Remember,
only 3
we're talking
million
about,
people do
because
not
most people
use internet.
Because most people still have some internet as well.
Only 3 million households.
Yes.
It's ones that don't have the internet. The hybrid households, they're spending a lot of their time actually watching terrestrial TV, and then some of their time watching on the internet, and it's a mix. So the 18 million is you'll do one form or the other. The 3.5 is ones who literally are only watching GT because they haven't got any other way of accessing it.
There's a difference between saying only 3 million households watch it because they have no other access. There are many households that I'm aware of that have other access and prefer to watch it, as you've also mentioned about the senior citizens,
etc. The word prefer is different. But sorry. I think we've done this. We need to move on.
Oh, all right. Well,
just two questions
left.
You
for
Robert?
Hello, Robert Beveridge, VLV member. It's a question for Magnus, really. I've watched over the last 30 or 40 years ITV's relationship with government and regulators. And what I've watched time after time is when ITV doesn't like something, implicit is the idea that you might hand back the licence. So I've seen you retreat from documentaries and current affairs, I've seen you retreat from non-news regional programming, and I've seen you retreat from children's programming. And that's just the highlights. So how likely is it in the coming negotiations over distribution that ITV will play this card again?
And I'll take the next question with it as well. Over.
Thank you, Colin. Not so much a question, but more of a comment. So I work for Everyone TV, which is the organisation that's been mentioned a couple of times. We look after Freeview, FreeSat and Freely. And the one thing that we haven't perhaps touched on is accessibility. So the thing with Freeview is that it's a static service. It's very, very hard to innovate on Freeview. It takes years. Whereas with Freely, which is this new internet platform that brings live TV and on-demand content together. We launched it in April, and we have already released 4 new updates. It's a bit like having a phone. You get used to your iPhone updating over time. With every update, we can introduce new accessibility features. So we have an accessible TV guide that offers audio description, subtitling, text-to-speech, and we can carry on innovating in that area with accessibility. So when we think about an ageing population, I appreciate the comments that were made about the familiarity of DTT, but we should also think about the new features that can be delivered with online TV.
Thank you. And a final question from the front. You've been waiting very, very patiently, and then that really is wrap up.
Hello, it's Clive Lever again. Sorry about this. National Federation of the Blind UK. My question is, given that year upon year upon year, when being asked, a number of the TV channel providers are saying it's difficult as an answer to the question, how can we get audio description and subtitle on catch-up on their channels? What can, if anything, regulating organisations such as government and or Ofcom or whoever do to make this easier so that we do actually get audio description and subtitles when we listen or when we watch the following day because we were out when Coronation Street is on, etc., or whatever may be your taste. I would like to see. I would very much like to see some sort of progress on this, certainly, because it can be quite a deterrent for some people with those access requirements. As to whether or not they actually watch something on the internet. If I'm only going to get half of a program on internet versus the whole of the program, if I watch it live, then wherever possible, I would actually watch on the actual DTT, direct digital terrestrial TV, rather than the internet, because I want the whole program, please.
Ed, is it something for Ofcom, this, or?
Happy to take both of perhaps reflect on a comment from Everyone TV as well. So what we had a chapter in our report which set out the importance of accessibility as part of this debate. So a lot of smart TVs, which are the main kind of, it's very hard to buy an unsmart TV today, and a lot of smart TVs are designed in line with with a smartphone interface, with a tile and apps and so on, and that is very unfamiliar to a large number of people who don't take smartphones. Following on from the review, while the government consider our findings, we've widened our accessibility working group from just the TV manufacturers, essentially bringing in smart TV manufacturers so that they are thinking about the technology they can contribute to accessibility alongside what the broadcasters do.
And there are platforms such as Windows, which a lot of people are still using to be able to go onto the internet and actually look up on the website as well. That's where you lose it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other area we're looking at quite closely is the possibilities of new technology that are particularly through. I know there's a lot of research into AI and its ability to lower the cost and increase the accuracy of a range of these. The media bill, which some of you will have followed and others not, but the media bill also extends a range of regulations into the online players as well. I won't go through the technicalities.
But now the Media Act.
Now the Media Act,
yes.
goodness, I'm still, we need a swear box at Ofcom Towers to get back into the habit. Now passed and in force, indeed.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for your patience. But it was a very, very good discussion, I thought. Many thanks to all the members of the panel. I thought we got the whole range of views there. What's very clear is that this is a start of debate, but it's also very clear, I hope this is a very important debate, because it is going to affect all of us in the way we access our television and other services at home. So it's very much a case of watch this space. Thanks again to everybody for coming. Thank you to everybody. My thank you to everybody.